It was an ordinary afternoon when I found myself at the kitchen sink, immersed in soapy water. Unexpectedly, the pipe beneath the sink emitted a strange creak, and before I could react, water surged forth like a broken hydrant. I leapt back with a startled shout, but the damage was done. I was soaked, my blouse clinging like a second skin, as water began to flood the kitchen floor, transforming it into a miniature lake. "Oh great," I muttered, reaching for a towel. Attempting to wrap it around the pipe was as futile as trying to stop a waterfall with a handkerchief. With David at work, I was clueless about what to do next. My heart pounded as I reached for my phone, the wet screen slippery under my fingers. A quick search brought up the first result: Quick Fix Plumbers, ever ready for emergencies. I dialed their number, pacing through the puddles as it rang. A cheerful voice greeted me. "Quick Fix Plumbers, how can we assist you today?" "Hi," I said, struggling to steady my breath. "My kitchen pipe just burst and water is everywhere." "No worries, we'll dispatch someone right away. Could you provide your address?" I relayed the information, and she assured me help was on the way. I hung up, surveying the watery chaos around me. I looked as if I'd been through a downpour. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Hurrying to the door through the water, I opened it to see a tall, lean man with smooth dark skin and full lips, clad in a blue uniform with the company's logo. His toolbox dangled at his side, and he offered a reassuring smile. "I'm Calvin," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "You reported a burst pipe?" "Yes," I replied, a bit flustered, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his touch warm and slightly rough. "I'm Kayla. Please come in. The kitchen's this way." As he followed me in, his boots squeaked on the wet tiles. I suddenly became acutely aware of my appearance, my blouse still plastered to me, hair disheveled, and bare feet with chipped red toenail polish. I crossed my arms, trying to regain composure. "That's quite a leak," Calvin remarked, setting his toolbox down. He bent over the sink to assess the situation, and I found myself observing him, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his muscles moved beneath his uniform. I shook my head to clear it. "Can you fix it?" I asked, my voice inadvertently husky. He glanced back with a slight smile. "I'll do my best. It might take some time, the pipes are pretty corroded." "Take all the time you need," I replied, leaning against the counter. "I'm not going anywhere." He nodded, turning back to his work. I watched as he unpacked his tools, his movements confident and assured. A flutter stirred in my stomach, a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was thrilling. "Can I get you something to drink?" I offered, eager to keep busy. "A beer, maybe. You look like you've had a long day." He hesitated, a slight crease forming on his brow. "I'm still on duty, ma'am," he said politely. I waved dismissively. "Please call me Kayla. And one beer won't hurt. It's a hot day." After a moment's pause, he nodded. "All right, Kayla, a beer would be nice." "Thank you." I smiled, feeling a small triumph. Fetching a beer from the fridge, I popped the cap and handed it to him, our fingers brushing lightly. In that fleeting touch, something unfamiliar stirred within me. I was convinced he sensed it too. I leaned back against the counter, watching him as he worked. He worked with precision, his hands steady and deliberate. I found myself curious, eager to know more about him. "So, Calvin," I began, savoring his name as I spoke it. "How long have you been in the plumbing business?" He glanced up, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "About 5 years now. Started as an apprentice right after high school." "That's impressive," I remarked, sipping my own beer. "You've amassed quite a bit of experience for someone so young." He shrugged, focusing once more on the pipe. "I've always been good with my hands," he replied, and I felt a warm flush rise at the unintended double meaning. "I can tell," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He paused, meeting my gaze, a subtle smile mirrored in his eyes. Clearing his throat, he returned to his task. "What about you, Kayla? What do you do? I shrugged, taking another sip. Nothing as hands-on as you, I admitted. I was in marketing but retired early. Now I try to keep the house in order. He chuckled, a sound that sent a delightful shiver down my spine. Looks like you've got your work cut out for you, he said, motioning towards the waterlogged floor. I laughed, feeling warmth radiating through me. Yes, indeed. He continued working in silence, and I found myself eager to keep the conversation going. I asked him about his day, his likes and dislikes, small talk, really. He answered politely, but I noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the brief pauses in his work. I was making him uneasy, and I enjoyed it. Finishing my beer, I set the bottle down and reached for another, noticing the slight hitch in Kelvin's breath. Raising an eyebrow, I asked, something wrong, feigning innocence. He shook his head, focusing on the pipe again. No, Kayla, just be cautious. The floor's slippery. I smiled, opening the beer. I'm always careful, Kelvin, I teased, taking a sip. But accidents do happen. He didn't reply, but I saw the blush spreading up his neck. I felt a thrill, a sense of power. I was having an effect on him, and it was exhilarating. The way his hands fumbled slightly, the catch in his breath as I moved past him, it was intoxicating. I felt more alive than I had in years. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Kelvin straightened up, wiping his hands on a towel. All set. The pipe's fixed. You shouldn't have any more issues. I smiled, placing my beer on the counter. Thank you, Kelvin, I said softly. You're a lifesaver. He nodded, packing up his tools, and I watched with a sense of disappointment. I didn't want him to go. Let me help clean up. It's the least I can do, he offered, gesturing to the water. I smiled, handing him a towel. I won't refuse that. We worked together, mopping the water in silence, the tension between us palpable, the unspoken words hanging in the air. As we finished, Kelvin turned to me, a small smile on his face. Well, that's it. You're all set. I felt a pang of disappointment but nodded, accompanying him to the door. He stepped onto the porch, turning back to face me. It was nice meeting you, Kayla, he said softly. I leaned against the doorframe, smiling. The pleasure was all mine, Kelvin, I replied, my voice low. As he left, a sense of loss and longing lingered. I craved more of him, more of this feeling. But for now, it was enough. It was a beginning. Later, I found myself unable to concentrate on anything else, replaying our encounter in my mind, the flex of his muscles, his laughter, the spark in his eyes. I felt like a teenager with a crush, not a woman nearing 60. I scolded myself, trying to banish the thoughts, but they persisted, uninvited and insistent. I immersed myself in cleaning the kitchen, hoping to distract myself from the torrent of thoughts swirling in my mind. I mopped the floor, scrubbed the counters, even reorganized the pantry. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of Kelvin from my thoughts. The way his biceps flexed as he worked, the confident manner in which he handled his tools, his presence. I felt a flush rise at the memory. I was being unreasonable, I scolded myself. I was a married woman with a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a wonderful life. I had no reason to dwell on another man, especially one so much younger. A pang of guilt twisted in my stomach. I needed to regain my composure, to banish these foolish thoughts. But as the day progressed, I felt increasingly restless. I was on edge, my body humming with a need I hadn't experienced in a long time. As evening settled, I heard David's car pull into the driveway. I sighed, trying to collect myself, to push thoughts of Kelvin aside. I greeted David at the door, embracing him with a hug and a kiss as he entered. He appeared weary, his shoulders slumped, his eyes tired. "How was your day?" I asked, taking his briefcase from him. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Long," he replied. "Meetings all day and the traffic was brutal." I murmured in sympathy, leading him into the kitchen. I had prepared his favorite meal, steak and potatoes, hoping to brighten his mood. We sat down to eat, and I focused on our conversation, on his day, on anything but the thoughts that still lingered. But as we ate, my mind wandered. I kept thinking about Kelvin, about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel. I shifted in my seat, trying to mask my discomfort. After dinner, David and I moved to the living room. He turned on the TV, flipping through channels until he found a sports game. I curled up next to him, attempting to focus on the screen, but my mind was elsewhere. I felt tension in my body, a yearning I couldn't ignore. I needed a release, a distraction. I needed my husband. I turned to David, running a hand along his thigh. He looked at me, surprise flickering in his eyes. It had been a while since we'd been intimate, too long. I leaned in, hoping to reignite the passion that lay beneath years of routine. I excused myself, slipping upstairs to change. I rummaged through my drawer for something daring, something that would catch David's eye. I settled on a black nightie, one I hadn't worn in years. It was silky and sheer, leaving little to the imagination. I slipped it on, feeling a thrill of anticipation. I wanted tonight to be different, to be special. I walked back downstairs. David looked up as I entered the room, his eyes widening as he took in my appearance. I smiled, feeling a surge of confidence. I sat down next to him, running my hands over his chest. He leaned closer, and we began to reconnect. But as we did, my mind drifted. Thoughts of Kelvin intruded, his gaze, the way he made me feel. I felt unfaithful, even if it was just in my mind. I tried to focus on David, on the moment. But as our connection deepened, I couldn't shake Kelvin from my thoughts. A heat built within me, overwhelming and consuming. And then, at the height of our intimacy, it happened. I murmured his name. Kelvin. It slipped out unbidden, unwanted. I gasped, eyes flying open, hand covering my mouth. David pulled back, shock and confusion in his eyes. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stared at him, heart pounding. I needed to think quickly, to come up with an explanation, a lie. I found myself at a crossroads, unable to confess the truth to David. I don't know, I stammered, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. I must have been thinking about a kid I used to know, named Kelvin. I was imagining scolding him for something he did. David studied me, his brow furrowed. I maintained his gaze, striving to keep my face neutral, concealing the turmoil inside. A wave of guilt washed over me. I was deceiving my husband, but I couldn't reveal the truth. I couldn't admit to the thoughts that had consumed me. After a moment, David nodded, accepting my explanation. He drew me close, his hands gentle as they moved over me. I tried to be present, but the thoughts clung to me, persistent and haunting. The following morning, I woke early, making breakfast for David, attempting to act normal. He kissed me goodbye, unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. As he drove away, I felt an odd sense of relief, a sense of freedom. Alone now, I was excited. I paced the house, restless, anxious, eager. There was an undeniable yearning. I needed an outlet, a distraction. I needed Kelvin. Then an audacious idea struck me, bold, risky, but I was past caring, beyond rationality. I was driven by need. I rushed to the kitchen, examining the pipes under the sink. With trembling hands, I grabbed a wrench and struck it against the pipe. The pipe snapped, water gushing wildly. A thrill of excitement coursed through me. I had done it. I had set the stage, created the opportunity. Now, I just had to make the call. I dialed the number. The same cheerful voice answered, and I put on my most distressed tone, describing the emergency, the burst pipe, the water everywhere. She assured me someone would be sent over right away. I hung up, anticipation thrumming through me. I hurried upstairs, changing into a low-cut dress that accentuated my figure. I applied a hint of perfume, wanting to look my best for him. I even sprinkled some water on myself, aiming to seem irresistible. I knew I was acting foolishly, but I couldn't stop myself. As I awaited Calvin's arrival, I paced the living room anxiously. I felt like a teenager awaiting her prom date, not a woman nearing 60 waiting for her plumber. It was ridiculous, absurd even, yet I couldn't deny the emotions surging through me. Finally, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there he was, Calvin, standing on my porch, a small knowing smile on his lips. A flush crept up my neck. He was even more handsome than I remembered. "Hi, Kayla. You broke your pipe again," he said, his voice soft, his eyes warm. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Yes, I did," I replied, my voice a bit breathless. "This time, it's worse." I led him into the kitchen, acutely aware of his presence behind me. I could feel his eyes on me. A thrill of excitement ran through me, a sense of anticipation. I was playing with fire and I knew it, but I couldn't stop myself. "Wow, that's quite a leak you've got there." "It's even worse than yesterday," Calvin remarked, setting his toolbox down. He leaned over the sink, inspecting the damage. As I leaned against the counter, his eyes widened slightly. I knew what I wanted, what I needed, but I didn't know how to express it, how to reach out for it. "Yes, it's quite a mess," I said, my voice tinged with excitement. "I seem to have a problem with pipes. They keep bursting, keep leaking. I can't seem to keep them under control." Calvin glanced up, a playful smile on his lips. "Well, that's what I'm here for, to fix them, to stop the leaks, to make everything tight and secure again." His words carried more than a hint of double meaning, and my face warmed in response. I knew he was flirting, and I couldn't deny how much I enjoyed it. "I hope you can handle it," I replied softly. "My pipes can be quite demanding. They need a strong hand." Calvin's eyes darkened, his breath catching slightly. The effect I had on him was palpable, and it sent a thrill of power and excitement through me. "I think I can handle it," he said, his voice steady. "I've dealt with all kinds of leaks. I know how to mend the openings, how to seal the gaps." A shiver ran down my spine, and I felt an intense yearning for him. As he worked, my boldness grew. I leaned closer, noticing the sheen of sweat on his forehead, and the slight tremor in his hands. My presence was affecting him. "You know, Calvin," I murmured, "I've been having some issues with other fixtures too. The ones that are more delicate, hidden away. They need some attention, some fine-tuning." Calvin looked at me, his eyes reflecting an internal struggle between his professionalism and his desires. I knew I was testing him, and he was close to breaking. "Kayla, I can't," he said, his voice conflicted. "You're a client. You're married. I could get in trouble. I could lose my license." I leaned in closer, my voice a whisper. "I won't tell if you don't," I assured him. "No one has to know about our special repairs. It can be our little secret." Calvin sighed, a sound of surrender. I knew I had him. His defenses were crumbling. "Kayla, you're making it very hard to resist," he confessed. "I'm not sure I can keep the tools at bay any longer." A slow, victorious smile played on my lips. "Then don't," I encouraged. "Let's get to work. Let's fix those leaks, unclog the pipe. Let's make everything flow smoothly again." I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I closed the distance between us. I could feel his heart racing, mirroring my own. Our eyes met, and I saw my reflection in his gaze. Drawn to him, I leaned in, our needs perfectly aligned as we lost ourselves in each other. It felt natural, as if we were meant to be together. As we explored one another, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I was finally giving in to what I wanted, claiming what I deserved. I felt truly alive for the first time in ages. We sank to the floor, still entwined, ready and eager. We moved in harmony, and as we reached the peak of our connection, I felt complete. It was more than just physical, it was a union of two souls longing for each other. As we lay there, our breaths gradually calming, a mix of emotions washed over me. Contentment mingled with uncertainty about what this meant for our future. Calvin stirred beside me, pressing a soft kiss to my shoulder before standing. I watched as he approached the sink, his back to me. He picked up his phone, which had been unnoticed in the heat of the moment. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice still tinged with the remnants of our passion. Calvin turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "Just stopping the recording," he said, holding up his phone. I frowned, confusion setting in. "Recordings." He walked back to me, showing the screen. There we were, captured in the throes of our encounter. A wave of disbelief and betrayal crashed over me. I had been too consumed by the moment to notice my surroundings, but now the reality hit me hard. My heart sank as the reality of his actions settled in. "Calvin, what is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. His expression turned cold, the tenderness from before completely vanished. "It's our little secret, Kayla, or at least it will be if you do what I say." Shock and betrayal coursed through me. "What do you mean?" I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I need money, Kayla. A lot of it, and you're going to help me get it." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as his implication became clear. "You're blackmailing me?" I asked, incredulous. He shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I prefer to think of it as an exchange. You give me what I want, and I don't send this video to your husband." The mention of my husband sent a jolt of panic through me. I couldn't let him find out, not like this. I was trapped, caught in a web of my own making. "How much do you want?" I asked, my voice quivering. Calvin named a sum that made my jaw drop. It was more money than I could easily access, but the thought of my husband seeing that video was unbearable. Tears welled up in my eyes, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. "You have until tomorrow to get the money, or else your husband gets a very interesting email," Calvin said, standing up and getting dressed. As the door clicked shut behind him, the kitchen fell eerily silent. The brief sense of freedom I had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a crushing weight of fear and regret. I had let my desires cloud my judgment, and now I was paying the price. Curling up on the wet floor, I hugged my knees to my chest as tears began to fall. I had played with fire, and now I was left alone, consumed by the flames of my own mistakes, with nothing but the consequences to keep me company.